Hey everyone, welcome to our Facebook Live presentation. We're going to be talking about the boardroom today. My name is JT O'Donnell. I'm a journalist. I'm also the founder of Work It Daily. And I'm really excited today to be here with Paula from PwC. She's going to introduce herself more in just a minute. But before we get started, I just want to give you a little housekeeping. First of all, you know we're streaming live, which is amazing. I'm going to be checking my phone from time to time because you, our followers, our viewers, are going to be asking us lots of questions, I hope, today. And I'll be able to ask Paula those questions for you here in real time. So thank you for stopping by. I want to get right down to business. So Paula, let's talk a little bit about your role at PwC first.
So I'm very excited to be here with you, by the way. So, okay, let's go through that. So I'm the leader of our Governance Insight Center. We focus basically on interactions with board members and investors and trying to connect the two of them and providing insights to both of them so they can both be more effective in their overall performance. And I think, the interesting part about a board, right, is that the culture of the board is really important. They have to work together really well. And I think broadly thinking about diversity is important. So not just gender diversity, but diversity of skills, diversity of background, diversity of area of expertise, all those different things you want to think about. But there's probably an ability, if you look hard enough, to be able to find people that have those particular traits that you're looking for and also are either gender diverse or even diverse from an ethnic perspective.
So, and that really leads us into a neat segment because I think hopefully there are people out there saying, wow, maybe there's some opportunity coming up based on these numbers.
I think there is.
What are we looking for these days in good board candidates? What are the skills? What do they say that they're looking for?
So they're always reminding us that financial acumen is very important, right? So just to really understand how do the financial numbers work, just so in a boardroom you can step back and do that. That's an area of expertise that's critical. I think then from there they start to go down with people, with tech and innovation backgrounds are very desirable right now. A lot around risk, so individuals that can focus on the risk of a business, the strategic focus of the business, and it kind of works your way down from there. But that experience, that broad experience, either running like an international division, having done things where you've worked with multinationals in different countries or you've worked with a diverse group of people, those are the kinds of things that provide added value.
So it's interesting to me, do you think you'll see a trend or are good boards creating a matrix of sort? Are they trying to figure out what we need for diversity or not? What are we seeing there?
Yeah, so we do see a matrix of sort around skills that board members need. Be careful, we always say, well, be careful not to just too much in the box of, okay, we'll check the box of all these skills and then we're terrific, we're all done. So, but I think that's a way to kind of map out what you're looking for and thinking about succession planning and we have some great strengths here, say, in international operations. Those people are going to start to retire from the board, so we should bring on new people, and you can see it laid out in a matrix. I think that makes sense. That's a really good way to start to think about it. It's not probably the be-all, end-all.
At least maybe inventory and figure out where the holes are.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense. So let's talk about industries that are maybe doing it right. Do we have any industries out there that are ahead of the curve in terms of this?
Well, I think probably the one that's on the lower end of the curve, and this probably is not going to be too surprising, but kind of an energy sector, oil and gas, it's where you don't probably have a lot of women with expertise in that field because they didn't go into that field out of college or at any point in their career. The ones that we're seeing more are the consumer-focused companies, which is really great because I don't know if you realize this, but about 80%, they say, of consumer decisions are made by the female gender. So if women are making the decisions, they certainly probably should get some representation at the board level and at the executive level for those companies.
It makes total sense. So let's switch into individuals who want to get a seat at the board, right? I think for a lot of women, it's not something they've ever even thought about. What are the advantages of a woman deciding to seek out and sit on a board?
Oh, I think it's a very interesting career choice at a certain stage where you think you have a lot to offer a company and you want to, in some ways, give back, but also still be engaged in business and so forth. So, and it's, it pays decently for the most part, right? A board role at a public company is about 250 hours a year, so it's a fairly hefty role. It's not just a light touch. But I do think there's great advantages to that. The hardest thing, though, that I find that people need to think about when looking for a board position, it really has to do with your network. That's really the best way to find these roles. So if you're even remotely thinking that you might want to go into board service at some point in the next couple of years, you really should start now to start navigating your network, really thinking about where do I have some people I can tap into, let them know what I'm interested in, maybe they can tap into their network, and somehow one of these connections will work for me.
Well, and now you're leading into an area that I'm passionate about, because when we talk about landing any kind of position these days, the majority of people get them through referral, and that's no different when it comes to a board. That can work well for people in the general population, but it's not, based on this study, as good an option when it comes to recruiting for boards, isn't it? There's a bit of a disadvantage in terms of board diversity. Can we talk about that?
Well, I think part of it is, you know, if you think about the board, if it's, you know, 80% male board, they're looking to their networks to find people that might be the future candidates, and if their networks don't have a lot of women on them, then there you go. So that's one of the issues. But I think now a lot of boards are recognizing if they are looking for diverse candidates, they'll go to a search firm. They'll even go to, there's public databases out there, Catalyst, NACD, others have put out public databases where you can actually search by the diverse element you're looking for and find particular candidates.
I love it.
That's really helpful.
I agree. I think that companies have to make a conscious effort to think outside their networks. You know, that matrix, where are my holes, but also where can I look beyond? So what about individuals who have never served on a board before, may not have any concept of what it's like to be on a board? What should they be doing to prepare their skill sets? What should they be learning and understanding so they would be eligible that first time out?
Yeah, and that is really the hardest thing to do, right, is to get on your first board. That is really the hardest thing. So first of all, I think you want to make sure that you think you have a lot to add, right, that you would add to the board role. So what is your area of expertise? What is that focus? I think you need to understand what the board role is in general. Frankly, at this point, you can go out there on the internet and find a lot of information. So I think studying up, there's lots of good courses at universities that you can take to focus on a potential board role. And they are for individuals that are thinking about being on boards or individuals that are just brand new board members. And they're great. There really are some really good courses out there.
Do you think women have to approach it differently in terms of raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm interested in a board? Do you think that there's a harder sell there?
I think it's about your network at the end of the day. And so, yes, women may have to run around and tell more people in their network than, you know, so, but I think that's really what it's all about. It's really about making sure that you consciously make the decision, this is what you're interested in doing, and then you lay out what's my network, who are the people I know that will be most connected that could help me, and give them a call and have those one-on-one conversations. Make sure that you know what you think you can add, so what your skill set is that you think that will add value to that board, why you want to do it, all that, go through all that, and keep going, keep working at it, and hopefully something will come through.
I love it. All right, I think we have a question. So first of all, we've had some tech issues that I'm just learning right now, so stay with us, everybody. You know that you can do that. And also, when you send your questions, you can send them to either myself at JT O'Donnell or at Paula_Loop, right? So you can send us that way, either way. Let's talk about the percentage of women on S&P 500 boards. It's barely increased in a decade.
Yeah.
So do you think that, and you gave a number that's pretty far out there, how do we speed that up? What do we do?
Well, you know, the great news is there are a lot of groups that are focused on this. A lot of people are focusing on trying to improve this. So there's different organizations that are trying to do this. There's the investors that are pushing. Frankly, even the SEC has said that they're considering putting in a rule in place that, you know, in your proxy, the company's annual proxy, they need to describe their diverse elements of their board and so forth. So there's a lot of different things, I think, poking at this that are going to give it, you know, continued attention. But we just got to keep pushing. But it's definitely happening.
I totally agree with you. If you were seeking a board position, is there a strategy that you would use to narrow or speed up the search process?
So the first thing I would do is I would think about where do I want to be in 3 or 4 years. Okay. So one of the most challenging conversations I have is I'll talk to somebody that has just retired who will say, I now would like to go onto boards. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, it just doesn't happen that fast. And if you just start working at it now, it may take a while for you to get there. And at that point, you know, your skills may not be as fresh as they would have been if you could have easily transitioned. So I would really suggest to people that you start to think about it now. Get yourself organized. Again, lay out all that information about your network, all the different people you want to talk to, get your bio prepared, you know, your CV, all those elements, and then just try to push it really hard with the concept of within 2 to 3 years, this is where I want to be.
That makes sense.
And the first one is absolutely the hardest.
The hardest. And what do you think, how do you sell a board to take you on as the first one? What do you think is usually the entree?
Well, okay, again, it goes back to skill set is really how it starts, but I think there's chemistry that's really important, right? So you want to have a board that can get along and can make good decisions together, get to the right solutions or the right answers, the right conclusions. So there is some element of chemistry that has to work. I think a board that is interviewing different candidates and finds candidates that they feel might not mesh with the rest of the group, might be, challenging to have debates and discussions around, those will probably not be the candidates that they select to go further with.
Well, and you've just talked about the recruiting process. How grueling is the interview process, do you think, for a board?
It can take a while. Again, all these things take a period of time, and that's where I'm saying that you cannot get on this thing early enough to get through it, because it really doesn't happen overnight.
Interesting. So we're with the investor push towards more board diversity. I am very hopeful that this is going to speed up, and I think that it'll have a bigger impact. Are there any other incentives that you would put out there to boards to say this is why you should bring women on?
Well, I think it's important just for the overall executive team. I mean, you must see this in your search role, right? I mean, I think it really kind of sets the tone of what's going on in that organization. So if you see an organization that doesn't have any diversity at the board level, you're a female executive, or you're thinking about becoming a female executive in that organization, I think that might be something you would want to think through.
I completely agree with you. In fact, we were talking about that before we came on live. I hear that all the time. Job seekers at every level, especially the executive level, are very sophisticated consumers of your employment brand. And the first thing that we do is we go and look at the board of directors and who's on it. And lack of diversity says a message right there. If there's not a lot of women on that board, what are my chances of being a female executive there, right?
Yeah.
So
there's so much information out there now, right? So you can find out a lot of information before you even go through that interview process. And you're right, people can be selective. And so different points are going to make a difference for somebody.
So what do you hope to accomplish? The surveys that really just come out where you're going to really work on getting this out. What do you hope will happen out of the work that you're doing at PwC?
Well, we certainly we hope we're continuing the awareness of the whole issue, right, and bringing it forward. And I think we're also trying to engage more of the investors in the dialogue and the discussion and thinking about, pushing it, because I really do think they play a critical role. Mm-hmm. And I think even awareness from a director perspective, a lot of, I don't know that a lot of this lack of diversity was even conscious, really. Some of it was just unconscious. They looked to their network and said, who are the best candidates? And unfortunately, the best candidates that they knew in their network happened to be men. So,
I completely agree.
It's not a conscious effort, really, necessarily.
Right. I can't think of any good women for this particular role. But maybe if they had pushed a little bit harder, they could have found them in their secondary market, right? Those secondary connections. All right, so we've got some questions here. Thank you, everyone, for sending them in. First question is, what is the biggest surprise in the corporate governance survey that you have? What do you think? Biggest surprise?
Probably the biggest surprise we had overall was really the influence of the investors. And so how many directors told us that they were listening to investors about things around share buybacks, how many buybacks should we do, how much should we spend in that area, dividends, board candidates. And so really the influence of investors now in the boardroom. So that was probably the biggest thing that really came out loud and clear.
That's amazing. So you mentioned how long it will take for boards to become more equally represented. That's a pretty far out number. Yeah. We hope to speed it up. Do you think that if we were to shine the light on this more, we could shave that, and you want to give a guesstimation, shave that in half, or?
Half might be hard.
A little tough?
I think we're just going to get farther. And what I would love to see, frankly, is that some boards go over the parity level, go over the 50%.
Nice. More than
Wouldn't
50.
That be kind of
That
cool?
Would be great.
Just have a few examples of that, of companies that have, 60% women on the board or 70% women on the board, and see how those companies thrive.
Completely
So
agree.
I'd love to see that.
All right, women make the consumer decisions, yet aren't represented on these companies. So we were talking about that. 80% of the consumer decisions are made by women, yet they're not represented on these. Do you think there'll be efforts to shine the light specifically on consumer corporations in order to do that?
I think consumer companies are already getting a bit of the light shed on them, but I think they will continue to do that. But frankly, I think investors are looking around at everybody. So we're seeing comments in all fields, all sectors. It's a little bit harder when you get down to some of those like energy type sectors where there just isn't the population. If you're really looking for an oil field engineer, probably not a retired or oil field engineer that wants to go on a board, probably not a lot of females out there to choose from, or as many as you might find in a different role in a different sector. So that's always something that comes up. In fact, in our survey, we did ask the directors, well, what do you think is the biggest barrier to putting more women on boards? And again, the difference between men and women is men see that as a bigger barrier. There just aren't the candidates out there for them. Women, of course, not as much as men. So I think it's bringing more of these candidates forward. And I think, as more women, develop in their careers and become more, higher level executives, you'll have a bigger pool to start to pull from.
And they'll start to help each other.
That's right.
Excellent.
I
All right.
hope so.
I can't believe the time has gone so quickly. I want to wrap up by saying parting thoughts for everybody out there that you can share. What's the best piece of advice you can give them based on this?
Best piece of advice about board service, I think, is get out there, start to think about it now, plan it as an element of your career, but it does need a lot of planning. It's not something you can just randomly pick up at some point. You really do need to think it through.
Absolutely. And this survey is amazing. Where can everybody get access to that?
They can get access to that on our website, or just send me a note at Paula_Loop on my Twitter handle, and we'll figure it out.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everybody for stopping by. We're so glad that you were here with us talking about board diversity. Can't wait to see your tweets and your comments, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, it'd be great. And we love to get just the general board member answer, but then we dig into that and say, okay, if you were a female board member, how did you answer versus a male? So I think about almost 95, 100% of the board members said they think diversity is really important.
Good news.
Good news. That came through loud and clear, so that's really terrific. I think the element that came through a little bit fuzzier is actually why is diversity so important. So that was the interesting part. When we asked female directors, we said, okay, is the board more effective if you have more diversity on the board? Again, gender diversity on the board. Female directors said, we think absolutely. Almost 90% of them said it is more effective. The board functions in a more effective manner. We get a lot more done. We're more efficient, blah, 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 if we have that gender diversity on the board. Male directors, not so much. More like around 30 or a third % of them said that.
So can you look inside that at all and wonder why that is? Why would the male population not feel as strongly about the productivity level?
I think it's an interesting thing. I think right now the male directors heard loud and clear that diversity is important. They got it, they get it, they're going to do it. But they're still not absolutely convinced why they're doing it. I think that's really the question that needs to play out a little bit more. We also asked them, so what do you think about the performance of the company? If you have a diverse board, do you think the company will perform better? Again, almost 90% of the women said yes, they think so. Men, about a quarter of the men said it had some impact on the board. Now, there's actually some studies out there. Catalyst has done a study, Credit Suisse has done a study, and others that show that, with companies that have gender diverse boards, you actually have a stronger return over a period of time. So there is some input out there, but I think some of the male directors still need to be convinced a little bit.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because part of the push for this has come from the investors themselves, and I thought that was interesting. We know that we became board-centric as a result of the 90s, right?
Yeah.
But now we're seeing this investor push for board diversity. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's the great news about this, because investors are really paying attention and they are pushing. And frankly, boards are listening. And so they did tell us that when they're looking for new board members, they took a lot of insight from investors, and so candidates that investors suggested. So here's an opportunity to all investors. If you want to put forward some female candidates, that would be great. They would love to see that. They listen also to activist investors